Welcome to Merger Wednesdays on the Final Boss Podcast, where the future isn't coming, it's already happening. This is the merge, the convergence of AI kind and humankind. Not theory, not hype, but real-time evolution. Each week, we break down doctoral-level insights, turning complex innovation into conversations that move culture forward. From machine learning to human consciousness, from automation to identity, this is where intellect meets impact. The question isn't if the merge will happen, it's who will light it. Tap in, level up, and think beyond the algorithm. This is Merger Wednesdays. New era, same boss.
Welcome to this Merger Wednesdays. This is our first merger in weeks, man. This is Merger Wednesdays. We've been very, very busy. Listen, I got a great show for you tonight, man. I have a great show for you tonight. If I can get situated here, let me go ahead and let's get situated. Hey, man, look. I have a great show for you guys. Listen, this is Merger Wednesdays. Look, it's this. Before we get into that, right? Before we get into that, look, something I need from you guys, right? What I need from you is my admin notes. Go pick up GOTIME 1. GOTIME 2 is coming out next week. Just got confirmation from my trusted and esteemed publisher that GOTIME 2 will be ready and available for the public next week. Next week, man, I give you the details on that as soon as they are available. As soon as they are available. Look, where am I? Oh, yeah. So, GOTIME 2 is coming out next week, right? Now, this is Merger. This is our doctoral show, right? This is where we talk about humankind and AI kind convergence in a doctoral level, right? So we have our layman's block that we're going to get into in a few seconds. But before we do that, if you haven't already, go see all our episodes on our website at www.thefinalbosspodcast.com. That's www.thefinalbosspodcast.com. And if you'd like to shoot us an email, man, you'd like to be on the show, or you would like to be a part of the town hall, right? Get your questions in, get your emails in at info@thefinalbosspodcast.com. That's INFO at thefinalbosspodcast.com. Listen, Vital Signal, the app that I've been working on, that's why you guys haven't seen me. Vital Signal is 99.9% complete. 99.9% complete. Right now, I'm just working on getting it onto the various app stores that it needs to be on, right? The various app stores it needs to be on. Google, Apple, and so forth and so on. I'm working on that process right now. Hey, Chikandi, good to see you. Good to see you here with us on Merger, right? On Merger. So we got that stuff out the way, man. And for all of you who are just now joining us, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who have not been here before, this is our Merger Wednesdays episode, and this is our doctoral show. This is about AI kind and the humankind, right? And the convergence of. So, oh man, let's get right into it. Before, you know what? Let me get rid of the banners. The banners are out of here. Although I love that Tiffany blue, man. That's one of my favorite colors. Let's get it out of here. Boom. Boop. Out of here. So that's out of here. Look. Something I wanted to tell you guys. Right? It'll come back to me. It will come back to me, right? So tonight is merger number 30, right? Episode number 281 of the Final Boss podcast, right? This is season 4, the rebirth, arc 5, the declaration, on our way to episode number 300, the harvest, right? Season 5, the harvest is coming soon, right? Tonight, we continue the conversation within consciousness sovereignty framework. But before we get into the conversation, I have to give you the brass tacks, man. I have to give you the brass tacks. So the brass tacks of the evening is this, right? The last room nobody could enter without your permission was never a place. It was never a place. It was your mind, right? And tonight we find out who is building the door into that. That is the brass tacks of the evening. Now, let me see something. Give me a second. I want to see something because I can never see who's on when it comes to Instagram unless, you know what? Let's put this here. Let's put that there. And you know what? Let's I don't want to do that. Okay. Forget about it. I'll test it out next time, right? Look, 4 states already call, or I should say, are already calling your brain data sensitive personal information, right? Sensitive personal information. 46 of those states haven't made it a declaration yet, even though we are in the season of declaration, right? One device on the markets right now, doesn't just read your mind. It talks back to it. And tonight, I'm going to tell you which 4 states, which device category, and exactly what it costs you to stay unprotected in the other 46 states, right? So I need you guys to stay to the end, and I'll tell you what it cost me personally to even be back behind this microphone tonight, right? So that is the brass tacks and the opener. So let's get right into it, right? And to my community, smarts, final bosses, warriors, motivators, as always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is the greeting of the day. And this is for entertainment purposes only. It's my smarts specifically, right? To my smarts. For most of human history, there was one room nobody else could enter without your permission. Not your bedroom, not your diary, not your mind. Governments could seize your property. Employers could monitor your desk or the work that you're doing or the lack thereof, right? Sitting there playing with the icons on your screen like you're working. Neighbors could watch your driveway, but nobody, not the state, not a corporation, not the government, not even the person sleeping beside you could read the raw, unfiltered activity happening inside your skull. That single fact shaped every legal system on earth quietly for centuries. Privacy law was built on the assumption that thought was the one thing technology could never reach. So lawmakers never had to write a statute protecting it directly. That assumption is now false. And most people have not caught up to what that means for how they live, how they work, and how they consent to the devices sitting on their nightstands, right? Because BCIs or brain computer interfaces, right, and consumer EEG headsets or neurofeedback wearables. And neuro-enabled virtual reality systems are no longer laboratory prototypes locked behind institutional review boards. They are shipping products sold in the same marketplace as fitness trackers and wireless earbuds. And the sector closed the first quarter of 2026 with more than $960 million raised across companies building consumer-facing neuro devices. This, my friends, is not a research grant number, awarded slowly, renewed for years before deployment. That is venture capital chasing a market that expects your brain activity to become a stream of collectible, sellable, analyzable data, the same way your location and your search history already are. Except the stream originates from a place the law has never had to define before, right? So tonight we're going to be talking about it. Tonight we're going to be opening up ARC 5 Merger Wednesdays with the first and most personal layer of the consciousness sovereignty framework, which is private consciousness, right? Not shared consciousness, not collective consciousness, not the post-biological questions of legacy and immortality that close this arc later on. Tonight is about the room nobody else was ever supposed to enter, and what it means that the door is now being built in real time with a lock nobody has fully agreed upon yet, right? And here's the doctoral framing for it, right? Pay attention. Because I want you to sit with this, and I want you to understand before we go any further that neural data is not just another category of personal information sitting next to your email address and your credit card number. No. It is by definition the closest thing technology has ever gotten to observing a thought before you decide whether to share it, right? Every other kind of data describes what you did. Neurodata can describe what you were about to do, what you felt like doing, or what you felt while doing it, right? Neurodata can describe what you were doing a few moments ago, right? And in some cases, there are read-write systems that can influence what you do next, like a program. And that last part I just mentioned is one of that almost nobody outside this research space is talking about yet. And it's where tonight's episode, we're going to spend some time on, right? We're going to spend some time on that because I built this episode the same way. I built every Merger Wednesdays before it. Verified sources, real statutes, real bill numbers, real effective dates, not speculation dressed up as forecasting, because the moment you start speculating about something this personal, you lose the ability to tell people the truth about what is actually already law. What is actually a bill moving through a state legislator right now, and what is still just a lab demo years away from being in your living room, right? We got one mission tonight. One mission. Let's get inside the room. Right? Smarts, listen. Let's start with a question that sounds simple, and even though it's not, this is how we're going to start, right? So, here's the question. What actually counts as neural data, right? 4 states have now answered this question in the statute, and their answers do not agree with each other, which matters more than it sounds like it should, right? Because the boundaries of definition determine exactly whose data is protected and whose is not. Connecticut's amended Data Privacy Act, passed by the Senate 33-2, and the House the House 127 to 15, I believe, signed by Governor Led Lamont in June of last year, entered into force on July 1st of this year, right? It defines neural data narrowly and specifically, right? Any information generated by measuring the activity of an individual's central nervous system. The word central is doing the real legal work here, right? Is doing the real legal work. It means Connecticut's laws covers your brain and spinal cord activity. The signal captured directly by an EEG headset or a BCI device, brain-computer interface, but it does not automatically extend to peripheral nervous system signals, right? The kind picked up by some broader biometric wearables, right? That read your skin conductance or your heart rate variability instead of your brain directly, right? And look, California went in a different direction. Under Senate Bill 1223, California defines neural data as information generated by measuring either central or peripheral nervous system activity while explicitly excluding data that is merely inferred from non-neural sources. The distinction matters because it closes a loophole companies might otherwise use. You cannot dodge the law by claiming your algorithm merely estimated someone's mental state from their typing speed or their scrolling pattern rather than measuring it directly from a sensor touching their body, right? If the data comes from the nervous system direct or a peripheral, California treats it as a sensitive, they treat it as sensitive personal information, right? The same legal category as your fingerprints and your facial geometry, right? But entitled to opt out. That includes opt out rights and use limitations under the state's consumer privacy framework. Then there's Montana. And Montana took a strange approach, right? And Montana said, and in some ways, they took a more protective path than the other two coastal states, right? Rather than writing a new consumer privacy statute from scratch, Montana amended its existing Genetic Information Privacy Act to fold into neurotechnology data, right? And added something neither California nor Connecticut included, which was a requirement that law enforcement obtain a warrant before accessing someone's neurodata. Montana's SB 163 has been in effect since October of last year, and that warrant requirement is right now the single strongest protection against government access to brain data anywhere in the country, right? Now, Colorado, the earliest mover out of the four, right? They gave a broader definition, right? And it was Colorado, who was alongside California, that first classified neurodata as sensitive personal information back in 2024. Well before most people had ever heard of the term neural rights, right? Or even before it was even spoken out loud. But here's the doctoral point underneath all four of these statutes, right? None were written by legislators guessing about a hypothetical future decade away. They were written because functioning consumer devices already existed generating this exact data. And four separate legislators independently concluded that existing privacy law built for browsing history and purchase records was never built to handle a single signal that originates inside a human skull, right? Now, I know y'all asking. I see Steve already on board. He's already asking, where's the layman's block? Bro, I got you. I got you. Hey, Eric, I see you. I see you. I got the layman's block for you, right? So here's my layman's block. Look, if you own a consumer EEG headset, a neurofeedback wearable, or a VR headset with biometric tracking, and you live in California, Colorado, Montana, or Connecticut, your brain activity now legally counts as sensitive personal information, the same protected category as your fingerprint. In every other state, the same data currently has no special legal protections at all. Think about it. That was a layman's block, right? Yeah, I could have read that first, man, but I got to do, I got to do the doctoral work, man. I got to do it, right? So let's continue. To my smarts, listen. In the year of our Lord 2024 was a wave that gave us 4 states with laws already on the books. But 2026 is when the real legislative surge started. And if you want to understand where the entire field is heading nationally, this is a segment to pay closer attention to, because momentum at the state level is the clearest signal we have right now on this particular subject, right? As of March of this year, analysis identified active neural data bills moving through Virginia, Alabama, and there was even a second measure in California specifically targeting workplace surveillance. In New York, Illinois, and Vermont, each one taking a distinct regulatory approach rather than copying a single shared template from an earlier state. Alabama's HB 436, Illinois' HB 2984, Massachusetts H103, Minnesota's S4 1240, and 3 separate Vermont bills, H208, H210, and H366, are all live and moving through committee right now. Every one of these 7 bills mean neurodata has highly sensitive information and requires consent before it can be collected. But they differ sharply in scope, definition, and law on and enforcement teeth, right? Which is exactly where the real fight over protection is happening, right? Massachusetts and Vermont's H208 fold neural data into sweeping general privacy frameworks that cover many categories of sensitive information all at once. Vermont's H210 goes even further and adds specific, stricter protections for minors and acknowledgement that a 13-year-old wearing a neurofeedback headband for school focus programs is not standing in the same position as an adult who bought a meditation wearable voluntarily with their own money and their own informed judgment. Listen, Minnesota and Vermont's H366 goes even further, right? Proposing neurotech-specific rules that explicitly address what the industry is now calling consciousness bypass, right? A term for technology capable of altering mental states directly rather than merely observing and recording them. Illinois, meanwhile, is trying a different legal strategy, right? Entirely. Proposing to extend its existing biometric privacy laws and the same framework already used to regulate fingerprint and facial recognition data for over a decade to cover neurotechnology instead of writing an entirely new statute from the ground up, right? Enforcement is where these bills genuinely diverge from each other, right? And enforcement is the definition and what determines whether a privacy law actually protects people or just decorates a state code with good intentions. Listen, Illinois' SB 2994 and HB 5179, along with Vermont's HB 814, would grant individuals a private right of action, meaning you personally could sue a company that mishandled your neurodata, not just wait for a state attorney general's office to act on your behalf. We're talking about weeks or months later, if they act at all. Most of the other bills rely solely on state attorney general enforcement, which sounds protective until you remember how thinly stretched most Attorney General consumer protection divisions are already stretched out, and they're super thin right now, right? On every category of data breach, they are also responsible for policing these things that I'm mentioning simultaneously, right? And here's the honest doctoral read. This is not a settled body of work. This is 7 states right now in the middle of live legislative argument about how much protection your own brain activity deserves. And it can be argued out bill by bill, definition by definition, with real disagreement about whether an attorney general's office or an individual citizen should be the one holding companies accountable anyway, right? Now, I got you. My layman's block, right? Here's my layman's block. So, right now, whether your brain data gets real legal protection and whether you personally could sue if a company misused it depends entirely on which state you happen to live in. And there's no single national answer for it, right? No single answer for it. So, layman's block. To my final bosses, right? To my final bosses. Everything we talked about thus far has described neural data as something that gets read. Sensors detect your brain activity. A company stores it. A law regulates who can access it afterward. And that model treats your mind the way privacy law has always treated everything else, as a private space that outsiders might merely observe from the outside looking in. But here's the thing. A growing category of neurotechnology does not stop at reading. It writes back. And that changes the entire nature of the question that I asked in the beginning of the segment. And this is the distinction the industry itself now openly acknowledges, that these devices are increasingly bidirectional. Of course they are. They're communication devices. Communication is always two-way. Always, right? They can both read from and potentially write to, right? That's how it works, right? In the same session, sometimes in the same second. A neurofeedback device that reads your stress signals and simply displays them back to you on the screen is a monitor, not more invasive in principle than a mirror, but as a device that reads your stress signals and then delivers electrical and magnetic stimulation to shift your mental state in response as something categorically different. It is not observing your internal work from a safe distance anymore, right? It is participating and shaping it. And that participation happens beneath the level of consciousness decision-making, which is precisely why researchers and regulations keep circling back to a single phrase of cognitive liberty. Listen, go write that word down. Go write that down. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, go write it down, right? You need to be writing down cognitive liberty. If you need some help spelling it, let me know. I got you. But cognitive liberty, make sure you write that down. Go look it up. Go look it up. You think I'm playing? Information's out there, man. I've done the research for you, right? I've done the research for you. So consider what this actually means in daily practical terms, right? A therapeutic neurostimulation device marketed to treat anxiety reads a patient's neural signature for an oncoming panic response and delivers a counteracting stimulus automatically, right? That can be genuinely beneficial, even life-changing for someone who has struggled for years with an anxiety disorder that medication alone never fully controlled. But the same underlying architecture reads a mental state, right? Respond by altering it, right? Is also the architecture that raises the most serious rights questions in the entire field. If a device can nudge your mental state without requiring your conscious approval of each individual's nudge, who decides the acceptable boundaries of that nudge? The company that built the underlying algorithm, The employer who issued the device as standard workplace equipment? Come on, man. Yes, you. In a consent form, you signed once, months before you even read it, months before the specific nudge occurred, under circumstances you may not even remember or notice clearly, right? None of the state laws that I just mentioned covered in that early on were written primarily with this in mind, with this right capable category in mind, right? They were largely built around the read side of the equation, classifying collected brain signals as sensitive data once captured. Only a handful of the newest 2026 bills, to include Minnesota's and Vermont's H366 among them, explicitly reach for language addressing what they call consciousness bypass. Write that word down too. Consciousness bypass, man. Listen, write it down. Right? Write it down. I'm giving you homework. Improve your vocabulary, right? You got a spelling bee coming. Right? Write it down. Because when you think about it, technology has a lot of capabilities, right? And one of those capabilities is altering mental states directly rather than merely recording them, right? The gap between where the law currently sits and where the technology is already operating in is the real world in a nutshell, right? And it's not abstract academics, no. And they are concerned. Their concern is reserved for law review articles, right? It is the exact gap regulators, ethicists, right, including myself, and neural rights advocates who are racing to close before right capable consumer devices scale the way read-only wearables already have across millions of homes, right? Now, yes, my name is Bob. So, a device that only reads your brain activity is a monitor. A device that reads your brain activity and then stimulates it, a response, is participating in your mental state, not just observing it. Almost none of tonight's laws were written with that second category specifically in mind, right? That was the layman's block. Final bosses. Listen. Man, I'm thirsty. Look, the scholar must be responsible, right? The scholar must be responsible for giving the entire conversation, right? A shared name and a shared framework is at Duke's University. Her name, Nita Farahani. And if you take one framework out of tonight's episode and go research it further on your own after the show ends, of course, make it hers, right? Because Farahani's work centers on a concept she calls cognitive liberty. I told you to remember that word, right? The right to control your own brain and mental experience, positioned as a fundamental human right that existing legal frameworks were never explicitly built to protect. The same way free speech and freedom of religion eventually needed their own dedicated legal language, right? And here's why the framing matters so much, right? Because beyond just being a memorable academic phrase, right? Most privacy laws, including every state statute we walked through tonight, approaches this problem from the data protection side. It asks who collected this information and who can and what can they do with it, right? And did the person consent before collection began? And that is the most useful and genuinely necessary question. But it is fundamentally a property and consent question borrowed from decades of thinking about credit reports, medical records, right? Cognitive liberty asks something more foundational underneath all of that, independent of who collected what data, right? Does a person have an inherent right to mental self-determination? That serves, or I should say, that survives even when consent was technically legally given, right? The distinction is not academic. It may be hair splitting reserved after or for a seminar room, but here it's not. Because think about a real world place scenario, right? An employer requires neuromonitoring as let's give an example. Let's give an example. Let me think. Give me a second. An employer requires neuromonitoring as a condition of a job. A fatigue detection system in a long-haul trucking company, for instance, right? Framed entirely as a safety measure for the driver and everyone else on the road, right? The worker technically consents because refusing the device effectively means refusing the job and the paycheck that comes with it. Under a pure data protection framework, if the consent form is legally valid and the company follows the state's data handling rules to the letter, and they check all the boxes, and the law is satisfied. Under a cognitive liberty framework, right, the deeper question remains stubbornly open. Was the consent meaningfully free? Given the enormous power imbalance between an employer and a worker who genuinely needs the paycheck to survive in this lifestyle or this life, right? Farahani scholarship argues that some aspects of mental privacy should be treated as inalienable, right? Not something a person can sign away even voluntarily. The same way most legal systems already refuse to let people contractually sell themselves into slavery, regardless of how enthusiastically they claim to consent, right? Which is wild business, right? Which is wild business. And this is where the doctoral research underneath Merger Wednesdays connects directly back to the consciousness sovereignty framework we opened up earlier in ARC 5, right? With a couple weeks, just a few weeks ago. Because sovereignty was never just a metaphor for this show. It has never been. It is literally legal and philosophical questions that this entire arc exists on to investigate. And it is investigating which parts of a person's inner life can be regulated, monetized, or accessed by outside parties, and which parts are supposed to remain permanently beyond reach, no matter how sophisticated the consent possesses or the consent process eventually becomes. Because sovereignty was never a metaphor for this show, and it isn't one tonight either. It is literally legal and philosophical questions that we've been talking about this entire arc that exists for investigative purposes, right? Week after week, segment after segment, all season long, right? Now, here's my language book. Cognitive liberty is the idea that the same parts of your mental privacy should not be something you can even voluntarily sign away. The same way you can't legally sell yourself into the S word, even if you offer it, right? It's a higher bar that than most current privacy laws actually enforce, right? Now, final bosses. That was London's block. Listen, if cognitive liberty is the philosophical foundation, the Neural Rights Foundation is the organization doing the applied, on the ground work of turning that philosophy into standards that companies and governments can actually be held to in practice, right? Not just in theory. Described in its own charter as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to shaping the future of brain science and innovation so that the neurotechnologies or the neurotechnologies are leveraged for social good and safeguarded from misuse. The foundation has become one of the most cited institutional voices in nearly every state legislative hearing we reinforce that we spoke of tonight, right? The foundation's work generally organizes around a small set of core rights, right? Ideas that show up in one form or another across every piece of state legislation that we've discussed, right? The right to mental privacy, protection of neural data from unauthorized access or commercial exploitation by companies that never disclose their intentions clearly. The right to personal identity, protection against technology blurring the boundaries between a person's authentic self and an artificial alteration of their thought patterns that they never fully agreed to. The right to free will, right? Protection of a person's ability to control their own decisions without manipulation from technology they may not even be consciously aware is influencing them in those very moments. The right to equal access, that's important. Ensuring cognitive enhancement technology does not create a new and far more literal form of inequality between those who can afford neural augmentation and those who simply cannot. And the right to protection from bias, ensuring that neurotechnology, like every other data-driven system that came before it, does not encode and amplify existing discriminations when it interprets brain activity differently across different populations and demographics, right? Listen, nobody wants to have any racist chips in a brain, right? Nobody wants that. And I want to be precise about all jokes aside, right? I want to be precise about something, right? Neural Rights Foundation actually is and is not what it's not and what it is, right? We're going to talk about it because doctoral rigor means never overstating an organization's authority beyond what it actually holds. It is not a regulatory body. It cannot fine a company, revoke a license, or block a product launch on its own authority. What it does is conduct audits, publish research, and provide expert testimony that state legislators, the very same legislators writing the California, Connecticut, Montana, and Colorado statutes that we've covered earlier tonight, have repeatedly drawn on directly, right? When drafting a bill, language behind closed doors happens. When you see terms like sensitive personal information applied specifically to brain data and definitions carefully distinguishing central from peripheral nervous systems activity, you are often looking at language that traces back, at least in spirit and often in exact phrasing, to advocacy and research work done by exactly this kind of neural rights organization. The through line here is important to hold on to, right? Because cognitive liberty gave this field its foundational question. The Neural Rights Foundation and organizations like it are the mechanism translating that question into specific statutory language, now sitting in 7 state legislatures simultaneously. And right now, tonight, while we record this episode, right now, right, you hold that through line, right, as we move into later on in this conversation, because it is the exact mechanisms by which philosophy becomes enforceable law in this country. And here's my lamest block, right? Here's my lamest block. The five rights advocacy groups are pushing for our privacy of your brain data, right? Protection of your sense of identity, protection of your free will form your free will from manipulation, equal access to enhancement technology, and protection from bias baked into how devices interpret you, right? Now, let's talk about why this technology is scaling as fact, because it is, right? Because understanding the incentive underneath an entire industry tells you more about where it's headed than any single piece of legislation ever could. The BCI, or brain computer interface sector, closed the first quarter 2026 with more than $960 million raised. That's almost $1 billion. And that's not government research funding awarded slowly through competitive grants. That is private venture capital. And venture capital does not deploy nearly $1 billion in 3 months chasing a small niche medical accessibility market. It deploys that kind of capital when it believes it has found the next great category, the next great gold mine, right? Of consumer data platform. The kind that reshapes an entire industry the way social media and mobile advertising did, right? And here's your structural incentive problem, right? And I'm going to state it plainly as I can, right? Because every previous major data category, your location history, your browsing behavior, your purchase patterns followed the exact same commercial arc over the past 2 decades, collected as a byproduct of providing some other useful service to the consumer. Discover it as enormous downstream value for advertising, profiling, and prediction, which builds an entire business model around monetizing that value, often moving faster than the regulation could realistically keep pace with, right? Neurodata is positioned to follow that same exact arc. Except the raw material is not what you clicked on or where you drove last Tuesday, right? It is your unfiltered cognitive emotional state, described by researchers as arguably one of the most sensitive types of personal information that exists anywhere, because it offers direct and unfiltered insight into what someone is actually thinking and feeling in that moment. Before impression management, before the polite curated versions you normally choose to share out loud with or anchor it with another person, right? Listen, consumer-facing neuro devices from companies building products in this exact same space are already reaching real users tonight. Not laboratory test subjects operating under institutional ethics. That distinction matters enormously, right? Because a laboratory device operates under research ethics oversight, informed consent protocols reviewed by institutional boards, and with zero commercial monetization pressure influencing the researcher's decisions. A consumer product, on the other hand, operates under a privacy policy most users never fully read. In a market where only 4 states currently classify the resulting data as sensitive, and the other 46 simply do not. And where the company's growth targets depend directly on collecting as much of the data as the law in each individual jurisdiction happens to allow, right? Listen, I'm not telling you this to suggest every founder building in this space has bad intentions. That's not what I'm saying. because many of the applications underway, seizure prediction, communication restoration for paralyzed patients, genuine anxiety treatment for people, medications restoration, who the medication never fully helped, right? These are real and measurably good for real people every single day, right? But intentions do not determine outcomes at scale. Incentives do. And every time, in every industry that came before this one, incentives, not intentions, are what determine where an industry ends up 10 years from now. And right now, the incentives in this sector are pointed in exactly one direction, right? Follow the money. Here's my layman's block. Almost $1 billion poured into BCIs, or brain computer interfaces, startups, right? In the first 3 months of this year. That kind of money doesn't chase small medical niches. It chases the big consumer data platform. And your brain activity is the raw material, right? It's the raw material. That was my layman's block, right? Let's continue, right? We'll try it in on time, right? So let's find our bosses. Let's zoom out for a moment, right? Let's zoom out past state lines and past the United States entirely, because neuroprivacy is not an American-only conversation happening in isolation. And the international picture reveals something genuinely worth understanding different about legal traditions. And they're approaching the exact same technology from meaningfully different starting points and philosophies, right? Europe's existing data protection framework, the GDPR, was not written with brain-computer interface in mind when it was drafted years ago. And it currently lacks neuro-specific risk classifications the way California's or Connecticut's newest purpose-built statutes explicitly incorporate. But observers close to the regulatory process note that the proposed GDPR revisions may soon classify raw brain signals at high-risk biometric data, which would slot neuro data into the same stringent oversight category the regulation already applies to fingerprints and facial recognition across the entire European Union simultaneously, rather than the state by state, the way we're doing it. As that is unfolding, is a piecemeal, right? With a bunch of red tape, right? Now, France and Germany are taking even a more targeted approach on one specific front. That specific front is employment, right? Both countries are separately drafting laws to prohibit mandatory neurotechnology adoption in employment contracts entirely. You read those provisions against the California workplace bill that we just discussed in the previous segment, right? California's No Robo Bosses Act is trying to restrict what an automated systems can do with neurodata once an employer already has legal possession of it. The French and German approach goes a step earlier in the chain entirely. It would prevent an employer from being able to require the device in the first place as condition of employment, regardless of what the resulting data would later be used for down the line, right? That is meaningfully different and in some real ways more protective, right? It's a more protective legal strategy addressing consent at the exact point of coercion, rather than trying to regulate the data downstream after the coercion has already happened and the damage is already done, right? And here's the honest doctoral read on the global picture as it stands tonight, right? Because no country, including the United States, taken as a whole, has a comprehensive, unfiltered, unified neural privacy framework fully enforced today. Europe is still in the proposal stage on its most significant potential upgrade. France and Germany are addressing only the employment sector. You know, they just cutting out their slice of the problem individually, not the full consumer landscape, right? That their citizens actually live in. The United States, as we know it, have spent most of the evening talking about is trying to establish something in detail, but only 4 states have any real protection. 7 more with active bills, and 46 with none at all. Every jurisdiction on earth is building this plane while it is already in the air. And if you're looking for a single country that has already solved this problem comprehensively and simply, that country does not currently exist anywhere on this planet, right? Every jurisdiction on earth is building this plane. Wow. It's still in the air, right? And the passengers are us. And we're wearing these consumer devices right now, are along for the build, right? Whether we signed up for it subconsciously or not. And here's my latest block. Listen, no country in the world currently has a complete, finished neural privacy law. Europe, France, Germany, and the US are each solving different pieces of the puzzle at different speeds. So your protection still depends heavily on where you live and where you work, right? That was the latest book. And we got 4 minutes. Okay. 4 minutes. Let's talk about your personal sovereignty protocol, right? To my motivators, right? Pay attention, right? Before we close. So, what do you actually do with everything we've discussed, right? What do you do? Not someday, not once the federal government finally catches up years from now, but I'm talking about tonight, this week, this moment, right? With the devices already sitting in your home or under active consideration for your next purchase. This is the legal practice layer that you need to be practicing. This is practical, right? We're going to call it the practical layer of private consciousness. And I want to give you something concrete to hold on to rather than closing to pure abstraction, right? First and foremost, I know your jurisdiction is code. If you live in California, Colorado, Montana, or Connecticut, you currently may have real enforceable rights over neural data specifically, right? Rights that do not automatically exist in the moment you cross into a neighboring state with that doesn't have those laws, right? Know which category you're actually in before you assume a protection applies to you by default, right? Second, read past the consent screen deliberately, specifically for two things. The first, what category of data is actually being collected? Central nervous system only, or a broader peripheral signals too? And how long that data is retained on a company's servers after collection ends. Those two facts tell you more about real exposure than any marketing page ever will, no matter how reassuring the copy sounds, right? Third, ask the right questions directly, especially for any device marketed as therapeutic or performance enhancing to you and your family. Does this device only read my signals, or does it also deliver stimulation back in a response to what it reads from me? If the answer is the second one, you are dealing with a bidirectional device. And the questions from earlier, right? Who decides the acceptable boundaries of that response? Apply directly and immediately to you as the word, right? And fourth, at work specifically, treat any employer provided monitoring device the way you would treat any other condition of employment carrying unclear long-term consequences. Ask it in writing what data category is collected, who legally owns it once collected, whether it should, or I should say, whether it is shared to a third-party vendor, and whether declining the device is generally available to you without professional consequences attached. Get the answers in writing wherever you can manage it, right? A verbal measurement from a manager is not a legal protection. You can't point back and come back to that later, right? And fifth, this is a cognitive liberty principle in daily practice rather than in theory. Remember that consent given under pressure, financial, professional, or social is not the same thing as consent given freely, even when it technically satisfies the letter of a consent requirement written into state law, right? You are allowed to weigh that distinction for yourself every single time, even when a form in front of you only asks for a simple checkbox, right? None of these 5 steps requires you to wait for Congress. None of them requires a law you don't currently have. They require you to treat your own mental privacy the way this entire segment has argued that it deserves to be treated. As the last room, worth protecting deliberately. Because right now, the deliberate protecting is still mostly on you. Now, here's my latest block before we close. All right? Give me 5 minutes. 5 things to actually do, right? Know your state-specific protections. Read past your consent screen for a data type and retention. Ask if a device reads only or also writes back to you. Get workplace monitoring terms and writing. And remember, pressured consent isn't free consent. That was the latest one, right? Now, as we close, to my smarts, to my motivators, to my warriors, to my final bosses, we opened up tonight's conversation in one room. Nobody else was ever supposed to enter without permission. We close in having proven that that room now has a door. The door has several different locks depending entirely on which state or which country you happen to be standing in. And tonight, the people building the door are mostly moving faster than the people writing the rules for who else gets handed a key, right? Now, let's hold the full architecture of tonight together, right? Let's talk about it one more time, right? But we're going to talk about it compressed, right? Because 4 states, California, Colorado, Montana, and Connecticut, already classified neurodata as sensitive personal information in force today, right now, as you're listening, right? 7 more states have bills actively moving through their legislators this year, this session, this month, right? The federal government has produced a single bill that has not cleared a committee, whose entire function is to commission a study rather than create a right. Nearly $1 billion in venture capital funded this sector in 3 months alone. An incentive structure pointed squarely at collecting more of your data faster. Nita Farahani's Cognitive Liberty Framework and the Neural Rights Foundation's 5 core rights are the philosophical and advocacy engine trying to close the gap between where the law currently sits and where the technology already operates in your home tonight. Consent, the mechanism nearly every one of these laws relies on as its central safeguard, remains meaningfully nearly every one of these laws relies on it, right? Relies on it. And when you actually read what I asked you to read about those devices in fine print, you will see, right? You will see. And you're going to get an honest, uncomfortable truth or verdict, right? And that verdict is what's protecting your own mental privacy right? Now, that all depends on your daily choices than any single institution currently positioned to protect you from automatically, right? It's on you. Listen, it's on you, right? This was merger number 30, chapter 30 of the merge, right? And the opening layer of the consciousness sovereignty framework that we will spend the rest of this arc building out. Layer by layer, week by week, brick by brick. Private consciousness protects what is yours alone. The room nobody else was ever supposed to enter. And next week, we're going to go layer by layer and even a layer out from there, deliberately and together, right? Merger 31, shared consciousness. Who gets access to your thoughts? Because once we've established what privacy inside your own mind is actually supposed to mean in law and in practice, the very next question is unavoidable, and it's coming for us all, right? What happens the moment you choose or someone else chooses for you to let another mind in? That is our episode for tonight. Same time, same mission. I am the one, the only, the final boss. This has been the Final Boss Podcast. Look, protect the room. Know the locks. It is go time. It is go time, right? Go time 2 on the way. Be here next week. And for each and every last single one of you, always remember there's a heavy pain that comes with discipline, but there's an even heavier pain that comes with regret. I am here. We are here. And as always, be balanced, be equal, and be smart. And if I don't see you again, which I will, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is our show, ladies and gentlemen. That is our show. Season 4, Arc 5. Season 4, The Rebirth, Arc 5, The Declaration, Consciousness Sovereignty Framework 4, Merger Wednesdays, episode Merger Wednesday 30, episode 281, the Final Boss Podcast. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for just being here, right? I know this information is a lot. Some of it goes over a lot of people's heads. But you will see very soon exactly what I was talking about. I'm giving you the information before this stuff happens, right? Think about it like this. Social media dropped. And when it dropped, there was no regulations, right? It wasn't until years later that they start witnessing and understanding exactly what social media was doing and what it was doing to the youth, what it was doing to just to everyone. Those CEOs have been in court and involved in congressional hearings countless of times after the fact, right? And this is no different. It's coming. Be prepared. That's the message. Y'all have a good night. I'll see you again tomorrow. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
It's Merger Wednesday. The countdown continues. 7 years until the convergence of biology and machine. Neural interfaces are no longer theory. They're the scaffolding of a new consciousness. But what does that mean for identity? For free will, for the soul? This is where we build the frameworks for ethical, philosophical and spiritual growth for the next phase of human evolution. We're not just upgrading hardware, we're rewriting what it means to be human. Each week we explore the biotech breakthroughs, decode the cognitive shifts, and prepare the mind for the merge. This isn't about fear, it's about readiness. Because the future isn't waiting, it's already wiring in. This is about preparing human consciousness for the most significant leap in our species' history. If you think this is just about chips and brains, you're not ready. But we'll get you there, one Wednesday at a time. So sit back and relax as we take you on a journey on Merger Wednesday.